In the early 14th century, the world was vast, unfamiliar, and deeply fragile. Empires rose and fell. Kings ruled over unstable territories. Wars broke out over land, faith, and power. But beneath all of this human struggle, something far more dangerous was moving silently through the foundations of civilization. People at the time believed they understood their world. They believed disasters had meaning, punishment, fate, or divine will. But what they did not understand was that the greatest threat in human history does not always come with warning. Sometimes it arrives unnoticed, unseen, and unstoppable. This is the story of the Black Death, one of the most devastating pandemics in recorded human history, a catastrophe that did not just kill millions, but reshaped the entire structure of human civilization. The silent origins. The origins of the Black Death begin far from Europe. In the vast regions of Central Asia, where trade routes connected distant civilizations, something began to emerge among animal populations, particularly rodents. At first, it was not recognized as anything unusual. Disease was common in the medieval world. People often lived with sickness as a normal part of life. But this was different. The disease moved quietly through populations, carried by fleas that lived on rats. These rats traveled with merchants, caravans, and ships, unknowingly spreading infection across borders and cultures. The great strength of medieval civilization was also its weakness: connection. The same trade networks that brought wealth and culture also allowed disease to travel without resistance. The journey of death. As trade expanded westward, the disease followed. Caravan routes through Asia acted like highways for infection. Cities along these routes became early points of transmission. From there, it spread toward the Middle East and eventually reached the ports of the Mediterranean. Ships became one of the most effective carriers of the plague. Dark, crowded cargo holds provided the perfect environment for rats to survive and multiply, and with them came fleas, and with fleas came infection. By the time ships arrived in Europe, the disease had already evolved into something far more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. Europe's first encounter. Around 1347, the plague reached Europe through trading ports in the Mediterranean. At first, it seemed like an ordinary illness, but within days, something terrifying became clear. Those infected developed severe symptoms: high fever, fatigue, vomiting, and painful swellings in the body known as buboes. The speed of decline was shocking. People who were healthy in the morning could be dead by night. There was no pattern, no warning, no mercy. The rapid collapse of cities. As the disease spread, cities became centers of disaster. Population density made infection unavoidable. Streets were narrow. Homes were close together. Waste was poorly managed. Once the plague entered a city, it spread almost without resistance. Entire neighborhoods became empty within weeks. Families died together. Doctors, priests, and caregivers were among the first to fall because of their constant exposure. The more people tried to help, the more they risked their own lives. Soon, even basic social structure began to collapse. Markets stopped functioning. Trade halted. Governments struggled to maintain order. Death on an unimaginable scale. The scale of death during the Black Death is difficult to fully comprehend. In some regions of Europe, it is estimated that between 30% and 60% of the population died. Think about that. Not 1 in 10, not 1 in 4, but in some places, nearly half of all people disappeared within a short span of time. Entire communities were wiped out. Villages were abandoned so quickly that food remained on tables, and fires still burned in hearths. The struggle to bury the dead. One of the most horrifying consequences was the sheer number of bodies. Cemeteries overflowed. Churchyards were filled beyond capacity. Mass graves became the only solution. In many cities, special burial pits were dug simply to keep up with the number of deaths each day. Even then, it was not enough. The living were overwhelmed by the dead. And in many places, there were too few survivors left to even perform burials. Human reaction: fear and confusion. In the absence of scientific understanding, people tried to explain the disaster in ways they could comprehend. Some believed it was divine punishment for human sin. Others thought it was caused by planetary alignment or supernatural forces. Fear became a second epidemic, and as fear grew, so did suspicion. Communities began to turn on each other, searching for someone to blame. Minority groups were falsely accused of causing the plague, leading to violence and persecution in several regions. But none of these actions stopped the spread, because the true enemy was not human, it was biological. The unknown truth, modern understanding. Today, we understand the cause of the Black Death. It was the bacterium Yersinia pestis, transmitted primarily through fleas carried by rats. But in the 14th century, none of this knowledge existed. There were no microscopes, no germ theory, no understanding of infection pathways. To medieval society, the plague was invisible, and what cannot be seen cannot be fought. A world without people. As the pandemic continued, entire regions became unrecognizable. Fields that once produced food were left empty. Animals roamed freely through abandoned towns. Homes remained untouched, frozen in time. The silence was almost unnatural. It was not just death, it was absence. Economic and social transformation. Although devastating, the plague unintentionally reshaped society. With so many deaths, labor became scarce. Workers who survived suddenly had greater bargaining power. In some regions, feudal systems began to weaken as labor demands changed. Wages increased, mobility improved. Social structures began to shift in ways that would later influence the transition toward the modern world. This was one of history's most brutal examples of change through collapse. Religion and existential crisis. Religious institutions were deeply affected. Many clergy died while caring for the sick. People questioned faith, suffering, and divine justice. Some became more devout, seeking meaning in suffering. Others lost faith entirely. The psychological impact of the plague extended far beyond physical survival. It reshaped belief systems and worldviews for generations. The individual experience of horror. Beyond statistics and historical analysis lies the human reality. Imagine waking up and realizing your entire household is gone. Imagine walking through a city where silence replaces conversation. Imagine digging graves for your own family members. Imagine living in constant uncertainty, knowing that infection could mean death within days. This was not an isolated experience. It was the reality of an entire generation. The aftermath of the Black Death. By the time the worst phase of the pandemic passed, Europe and surrounding regions were fundamentally changed. Population levels had dropped dramatically. Entire towns had disappeared. Political systems had been destabilized. Economies had shifted. And human society had been forced into a new era. The world did not return to what it was before. It evolved from what was left. Long-term legacy. The legacy of the Black Death extends far beyond the medieval period. It influenced the development of medical science. It changed labor systems. It altered religious authority. And it became one of the defining events in human history. But perhaps its most important legacy is awareness. Awareness of how fragile human civilization truly is, and how quickly it can be changed by forces beyond human control. Final reflection. The Black Death was not just a disease. It was a turning point in history. A moment when humanity was forced to confront its own vulnerability. It showed that even the strongest civilizations can be brought to their knees, not by war or conquest, but by something invisible. And even today, centuries later, its shadow remains one of the most powerful reminders of how delicate human life truly is.